Yeah, actually, as a kid, I played a lot of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and a lot of games in the arcades. I went over to a lot of friends' places. They always had Sega Genesis or Nintendos or stuff like that. And it was really cool just finding it everywhere, and I thought it would be awesome just to know where that ended up or to make games. I eventually found an issue of Reader's Digest that talked about DigiPen, and there was this idea that I could go to a school that actually taught you how to make games or the process to do it. I thought that was awesome, so I did it. So I went to that school, DigiPen, and actually through DigiPen I ended up with my internship at Big Fish, which is actually how I ended up here. I did start at Microsoft doing audio stuff for the Forza series, but I've been at Big Fish for the last 6 years. What do I love about my job? I can do almost whatever I want. I have an incredible level of creative autonomy in the games that I'm actually working on. And when they say, hey, we need a puzzle here, or we need some type of new gameplay to go here, I can just go crazy and do it. Now, it's really awesome that the hardest problem that I have to deal with on a daily basis is how do we make this rainbow cat make noise? That happened in Drawn 3, and there was a rainbow cat where you had to play its teeth in a certain order to open a door somewhere, to wake up a giant, to fight a sorcerer, to find out stuff that you will find out at the end of Drawn 3. But yeah, a lot of absurd things like that. In the fetch games, it was a lot of fun to just have crazy ideas. I could sit home on a day off, and I came up with this crazy idea for how we could interact with, it was a shipwreck island where we were just hurling cannonballs. And I'd played a lot of Sinistar, and I was like, that'd be really awesome if you got to like Skull Island and you could just hurl bombs at a skull and it would say things. A lot of crazy stuff like that. And then we have a giant rainbow serpent that's just like shouting and spraying rainbows everywhere. These are all really fun things that I just couldn't do if I was doing other things. Okay, so before I came to Big Fish, I worked on the Forza Motorsports series doing audio development for them, so a lot of their car exhaust stuff. And once I came to Big Fish, I've worked on the Drawn series, so Drawn the Painted Tower, Drawn Dark Flight, Drawn the Trail of Shadows. Followed that up with Fetch, a Boy and His Dog, about a boy and his dog. His dog gets eaten by a fire hydrant, he has to go off and find it. There's a giant rainbow snake. It's absolutely absurd, it's a great game, you should check it out. And then most recently Panda Pandemonium, which is a tile matching game about pandas and freedom. The advice that I always give people is just make games, however you can do it. If it's in Flash, if it's in Game Maker, if you're making them on pen and paper, if you're making them out of cardboard, just make games, because your portfolio is going to be the games that you make. And that's how people are going to pay attention to what you're doing. Well, it's really different in that I'm constantly giving you a service that I can update constantly. So if we see that people are loving like certain parts of our game, we can give them more of that. And if they're not responding as well to other things, we can get rid of some of those things that they're not liking. Everyone has a smartphone now. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people have smartphones. And as more of our games end up on those smartphones, we're actually giving consoles and mobile gaming devices a run for their money, because these just have such huge market saturation. It's pretty crazy that, you know, my grandmother can play my game on her smartphone that she just bought. It's kind of weird. It's interesting. There's a lot of things going on with consoles because they're not as widespread as they were previously. So I think we're going to see a lot more games that are focusing on what consoles are good at. There's a lot of those first-person shooters that work really well on consoles. They're going to continue doing that. Yeah, I think it's going to go in both directions. You're going to see games, a lot more games that aren't games as we think of them right now. Like there's beautiful games like Flower, which are great. There's going to be a lot more experiences, I think, which is going to be really cool. And there will be a lot more games that are just full-on simulations of things. Like there's games like Skyrim where you're running around in just a fantastical world, or even Grand Theft Auto where you're running around in this Grand Theft Auto world where there's cars everywhere and there's people and you're interacting with them. They'll have their own lives and stories. I think a lot more in-depth for all of that, a lot more storytelling.
Hi, my name is Cesar Quintero. I've been working in the game industry for about 9 years as a video producer, and I'm currently working at Area 5. My first video game memory would definitely be when my dad borrowed a original NES from his friend, just to see if we'd like it. I wouldn't stop playing Mario Duck Hunt until the second he had to rip it out of my hands to return it to his friend. So I was hooked. I knew video games were my thing. My first job in the video game industry was at OneUp.com. I was an intern, and on my first day, I started shooting the OneUp Show, this podcast they had. That was my first job in the game industry. I think my favorite thing about working in the game industry, specifically in video, is that I get to see everything just a little bit early, and not even early, but unfinished. So parts that didn't make it into games, stuff that got cut, artwork that didn't make it, I get to kind of see all that stuff before it gets pressed on the disc. So that's pretty cool. I think my favorite part about being in the Bay Area and being in the game industry is that we have so many people here that are involved, both in journalism, in art, in music, and in programming. I mean, we have basically an entire assembly line of game production here, like within a 15-mile radius. It's ridiculous. I think games in 2015 will actually go more episodic, and I say that because it's been tried in the past and it hasn't really worked because it's too new. But I think with TV and everyone being used to this kind of like broken up content, the smaller bite-sized pieces, episodic content will be the big thing in 2015. Looking deep into the future, I think games will mix more with emotional experiences and possibly pharmaceuticals. So I think we'll be kind of ingesting some drugs or substances that'll alter our brains to play games. Maybe.
Gaming memories. I had a original Nintendo, and it was, you know, just Super Mario Brothers, which was fun, but there was a point where I was one of the few people that got Mario Brothers 3 when it came out, and that made me pretty popular in elementary school. People were just like, "Oh, can I borrow it?" But no, my parents wouldn't let it. It took a lot to get that game. They were not going to let it leave the house. I actually never considered games as a job when I was in school. I was in school for genetics, and I actually made it into med school and was there. And when it came to a summertime job, it was going to be my last summer before med school was full-time. My roommate at the time was a sound designer. Just coincidentally, the spot I got to stay at. So we did sound design for video games and movies. This was down in LA. And he asked me, "You want a summer job? Do game testing?" And I was like, all right. And after doing that, going into a studio, and this was Heavy Iron Studios at the time, it was my first exposure to what a studio was like, what it was made up of, and what the people were like. And it was the first time I was really happy to go to work. I hadn't felt that going to med school or any other job. It was the first time I was surrounded with people that I had so much in common with. So I dropped out of med school. And I decided to pursue video game art and design here back in SF. I'd always done art, but I'd never considered it to be a thing I could make a career out of. I only thought of, I don't know, you make maybe graphic design, or else if you do fine arts, you're at the mercy of what people think is beautiful or not. It didn't seem like a safe or necessarily lucrative kind of work, but with the games industry, it's the best decision of my life. Like, ever since I made the decision to leave the sciences and go with the games industry, I've been happy and very successful. The games industry, well, it's great to be working in something you actually care about. I mean, at this time in my life, honestly, and I think a lot of people would say this, that you end up playing a lot less games, but I still love the industry as a whole, and hearing about games and reading about games. I'll talk to people who are playing games that I don't have time to play, and just hearing about it's really exciting. I mean, as a medium, I enjoy it like I enjoy comic books or anime. Like, it's just something really fun, and it's always entertaining. It is entertainment. It really, if you think about what's always the new technology, which lets you have opportunities to create game and gameplay. And so, for example, with your phone, suddenly you have this thing with you all the time. And this idea of being able to have short burst games you could play for a little bit, you know, when you're waiting on the bus or something, that the hardware, the new technology provided a new way to provide gaming to people. And that gaming has to adjust to that tech based off of like how it's being used. So it's really gonna come down to what's the new tech and how it's being integrated. You can imagine when they move to the phones, there's gonna be fun little things designed specifically for that minimal interface. You know, maybe it's somehow it's like a GPS scavenger hunt where you run around and it's like, you just like tap it real quick. You can still do that with your phone, but there's something more freeing about a watch, and you got to think about like what are the advantages of this new platform or this new tech? Like, how can you make a game specific for it? So it's always going to really come down to, consoles can only do so much more at the home. They're all trying to vie to be the one thing that's your go-to entertainment center. There's still going to be a lot of stuff around there, but for me, it's hard to even look at the console industry anymore. You have to be a behemoth. You have to have so much money to be involved with it. Even the indie scene is becoming so crowded that it's hard to put out something truly indie and have it get seen well enough. And so I think it's about just looking forward to what's the next thing coming out and really trying to figure out, how can I take advantage of it? Yeah, it's going to be a lot of augmented reality type of stuff for sure. I mean, everybody thinks Google Glass looks ridiculous, but there's going to be improvements to that kind of thing. This idea of a layer of augmented reality on top of normal reality, where you can create gameplay at anything you look at, anything you interact with. That and putting on a giant headset and playing one of the games inside of one of those things is a little limiting, but that's also going to improve. And eventually, you're just going to have games that are so immersive, it will be existence.
I've always been interested in video games as a kid, since I was really, really little. I remember as soon as I was old enough to be asking for Christmas gifts, it's like, all right, I want my Transformers, I want toys, of course, and I wanted comic books, but I wanted video games always. The first full plug into your TV console that I got was in the Television 2 that my uncle and aunt bought me, and that was wonderful. I spent so many hours on that thing. But I grew up in New York, California, and mostly Michigan, and went to the University of Michigan, and I got started in the gaming industry back in 1996, so I'm an old-timer in the business. What's weird is I'm a gaming journalist now, but I actually studied statistics in college at the University of Michigan. So I'm still a big Michigan fan, Wolverine fan. I watch football every year. I follow recruiting, hugely into that. But outside of that, I really have no ties back to my educational background, because all the math I learned, I think, as a kid, I've pretty much forgotten all of it. But now I'm a writer and editor for gaming journalism. I've been in the games industry as a gaming journalist since 1996, so that's about 17, 18 years now I've been in the business. So I'm one of the old timers. Very lucky to be in this business, but yeah, been doing it for a while. My background, I started at a magazine called Electronic Gaming Monthly, EGM. I did that for 4 years, went to a website, a startup called gamers.com, but then I was really lucky that EGM was then hiring for an editor-in-chief, and they asked me back to fill that position, and then I was there for several years. And then I left a few years ago, started my own startup called bitmob.com. Then we sold that to a company called venturebeat.com, and that's where I'm at now, running the games division, which is called GamesBeat. So there are a couple of things I would say to people who want to get into the games industry, right? And first, it depends on whether you want to be a game developer or a game journalist. Obviously there are plenty of other jobs in a business, like on a publishing side, marketers, PR, for example. But generally, if people say they want to get into the game industry, they probably want to make games, or they probably want to write about them. So if you want to make games, nowadays being an independent studio is so much more viable than it used to be. Back a decade ago, you really have to get in your experience with a big studio, work with a lot of other developers, and be a small cog in a giant machine. And that's still fine. If you could land a gig like that, great, because you're going to get a lot of experience. You're going to learn a lot from other developers and big companies, and that's all worth taking with you. But nowadays, if you can go to school for coding, you can go to school for game design, you can create your own product with a team of 3, 2, maybe even by yourself. So it's with Kickstarter, with all these companies that are trying really hard to get independent product on their systems, like on their platforms, like Apple and Google and Sony and Microsoft and even Nintendo. All these guys are pretty indie-friendly platforms now, so I'd say go for it. Don't let that stop you, and don't feel like you have to work for a big company. But the advice I would give to a wannabe games journalist is just to write, because here's the thing, a lot of people think they can write, a lot of people cannot write. It's just something you feel like, anyone could write. It's not true at all. So you have to practice and you have to read a lot. That's sort of an underrated thing, which is you got to read a lot of people whom you admire. You like their writing style, you like the way they express things or explain things. So if you read a lot, you can be inspired and kind of learn from better writers. And then you just practice a lot. You get some feedback on your writing, get some editing on it from people who aren't afraid to tell you if you're doing a bad job, and then just work at it. And then eventually you can pitch stories and pitch ideas and show writing samples to more established outlets to get some work. Mobile gaming has had a huge impact on what we do as game journalists, because here you're talking about this huge business that's only getting bigger. This is the type of industry now where people are leaving big established game studios to go do mobile games, because that's the future. Everyone has a mobile game, not everyone has a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One or Wii U or whatever. So it's a hugely important business, but the problem is here we're talking about games that are maybe $2, $1 to buy, or free. So when you kind of understand that market, you realize, well, people, including gamers, they don't need to read about these games. They could just jump in and try it, right? So so if your friend said, you know what, you got to play the new Call of Duty, maybe you're like, it's $60. I don't have a PlayStation 4 yet. Do I want to spend the money on a PlayStation 4? Do I want to spend $60 on the game? Let me read about it, and people are anticipating these games, the next Call of Duty or the next Titanfall or the next Halo, whatever. And I notice I just listed all shooters, but you want to read, readers and gamers can't get enough of that information on these games. So they come to us, and as gaming journalists, we can provide that content for them because we live off of page views. Now, if the industry is slowly shifting toward mobile, and you're talking about, again, a $2, $1 or a free game, no one needs to read that. No one's highly anticipating the next release of this free-to-play casual game on your phone that everyone's going to be playing. So we don't want to cover that stuff necessarily, because there's no demand for that sort of content. So it's sort of interesting. We're in this place in the industry where we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we cover this thing that's a huge phenomenon? It's the future of gaming. It's the future of the industry, but relatively few people are interested in reading about it. So that's our challenge. That's where we are today, and we're still figuring that out, but we're doing well in different places because we're aggressive at it. We have to be good at covering mobile. Free-to-play definitely is here to stay, because you want to look at two things. One, consumers now, there was a point, if you kind of remember, where people thought paying $10 for a mobile game is sort of on a high end but doable. Nowadays, there's no way people are paying $10 for a mobile game, because their standards for how much they're willing to pay for a mobile product has come down, because it's like, okay, maybe $10 was an acceptable price, then $7 and $5. Now even $2, $5, that seems like a lot for a mobile game, because people have access to so many free-to-play games. So consumer expectations now are that I should play this game for free. I'm just going to download it, I'm going to try it, I don't want to put any money into it. We're used to that now as consumers, as gamers. The other thing is, so many free-to-play games have proven themselves to be huge money makers, right? Whether we're talking about a very casual mobile title, like a Clash of Clans sort of type of game, or League of Legends, right? These are hugely successful games, so the potential to make money is still there. So you kind of see like those two work hand in hand. It's like, okay, if consumers want free-to-play, but game makers can make money off of free-to-play, there you go. That's the future of gaming. So, that's not to say AAA console titles will go away forever, because those obviously still make money as well, but free-to-play is definitely here to stay. To make a hit game, there's the obvious stuff. You have to have good gameplay, good visuals, something that's attractive to the consumers, something that has longevity, so like maybe multiplayer that people keep coming back to over and over. But it's much more than that nowadays. You know, it's marketing. Do you have enough money to blast this out so people outside know about your game and want to buy your game? You know, is it about distribution? You know, will you get in the right channels? Will you be discoverable? So there's a lot to the business that most gamers aren't even aware of. They just think, yeah, you make it a good game and you're gonna have a hit game. That's not necessarily true. Man, journalism is such a tough gig nowadays because, you know, print is clearly dead. That's my background. Online, our revenue depends on advertising and who clicks on ads, right? And then, like, half of you probably have ad blocker on. So it's a tough business to stay successful in. That's why you don't see a lot of new gaming journalists, gaming sites popping up. You don't see people necessarily hiring. You're hearing more about layoffs than hires. So it's a tough biz, but man, once you're in, it's great because you know, I'm a gamer and it's just fantastic getting to go to, say, shows like E3, for example, and getting a preview of these are the games that are going to come out over the next year, you know, and I get a chance to check them out and talk about them and write about these things. That's fantastic. You know, what gamer wouldn't like that? So I love having access to the industry. I love seeing games before they are released. I like knowing everything that's out there. You know, I have to admit some of the magic is lost of, like, when I was little, for example, I used to love going to GameStop or Electronics Boutique or Toys R Us and looking at the shelves of games and like, what am I going to buy? What is this? Looking at the back of boxes, looking at the box art and having no idea what these games are. That kind of wonderment and that sort of exploring and discovering games for the first time, that's kind of gone for me because I know everything that's coming out. I know what's going on in the industry, but still, I wouldn't trade for anything. I love this business. The hot topic of 2015's got to be virtual reality, right? Because there's obvious stuff like, all right, we're in the second year of Xbox One and PlayStation 4, so we're going to see some exciting next generation product there. Mobile's obviously going to continue to grow, so mobile's a huge deal. But by 2015, virtual reality units will be in consumers' hands or, you know, on their heads. So it's going to be cool to see where that goes. You know, is it something where it's just too expensive and most people aren't going to get into it? Is it too isolated an experience that people just aren't into it? You know, because, like, you know, are you going to be playing this at home and ignoring your family and your kids and your husband or wife while playing games? But that said, you know, the technology is really cool. Like, if you played with the Sony Morpheus or the Oculus Rift, it's pretty damn cool, and it kind of gives you even one little tech demo will make you want more. So it's a kind of exciting thing where, you know what, if people can produce the right kind of game experiences in virtual reality and it's accessible, it's marketed all right to where, you know, mass market will pick up on this, I think it could do really well. But I think that's what people will be talking about next year.
I am Joshua Pfeiffer, and I'm a senior quality assurance tester here at Self-Aware Games. Okay, so maybe the first time I played Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation, it was the first game to give me an emotional reaction to a game, and that was like the moment I realized that games can be so much more than just a pastime to play. You know, they can be right up there with movies as far as the emotional impact and the story and stuff. Back in 1997, I started working at an AOL subsidiary, and they were doing like basically really early online JavaScript kind of games. And from there, I went to Sega just based on having that experience. And then I've had a career over the last 15 years, about 8 different studios. You know, I really like the people that I work with. Like, there are other people that are hardcore gamers, or they could be casual gamers, but they're all kind of social and relaxed, and, you know, they all have kind of a nerdy element to them, so you all have something in common you can all talk about. It's pretty cool. What I really liked about QA, like especially when I first started, is the sensation of finding something and figuring out what caused it before anyone else could do it, and being able to track it down and then show the engineer. And it's just this kind of feeling that you can't explain. You just kind of have to have done it. But once you've you know, tracked down something that the whole department is like scratching their head over and trying to figure out, and then you're like, I got it. You know, that's the greatest sensation. Like, it's a really cool feeling. I think next year they're gonna refine free-to-play and in-app purchases to a point where it's no longer annoying and it's something that you can do if you choose, but you're not forced to do it, because I think right now that's really hampering a lot of game design. I've seen a few new games come out recently for mobile that definitely have that aspect. Like, I'll play it and I'll be like, okay, there's in-app purchases in this, but I don't feel forced to do it. You know, and I think that's gonna be a new thing. I think people are gonna start picking up on that. Because we're past the point where console games are like the future. Like, console games are going to be console games forever and PC games, but mobile games are only going to get more and more complex as we go from here. So, in 20 years, I think people are still going to be talking about trying to do virtual reality using the Oculus Rift and stuff like that as an example. They'll probably remember the Oculus Rift as that funny thing from 20 years ago that we all thought was going to be the next huge thing. But I mean, I'm not super big on virtual reality because I've seen it come and go for the last 15 years or so. And they've never been able to nail it yet, but we'll see.
Hi, my name's Todd Kelly. I'm a freelance game designer, game design consultant. I have been in the video games industry for about 15 years and worked in other kinds of games before that for about 8-9 years. I write for TechCrunch. I write a blog called What Games Are, and I'm writing a book all about game design. So the first game I ever remember really playing and being very inspired by was The Hobbit, which was the original sort of text-stroke-graphic adventure that appeared on the Sinclair Spectrum in 1984 or 5. It's the first game I remember really sort of becoming very engaged in the world of the game with, and sort of finding, if you like, the fiction, the story, all that kind of stuff, just super engrossing. And also, it was interesting for me because I played the game before I ever actually read the books or even heard of Tolkien or that kind of thing, because I was only 9. And so when I actually came around to reading the book sometimes later, I had this kind of weird sensation where the game felt like the more legitimate version and the book felt a bit like as though it was a kind of a strange recording or a take on kind of what the original, or if you like, sort of was supposed to be. So I didn't study games in college at all. I, however, encountered games a lot through the sort of peripheral scene, if you like, through my university. I had 2 attempts to get a university degree. The first one I failed very badly was when I attempted to study to become an engineer, and it turned out I just wasn't very good at that sort of thing. But the second one was when I went back about 2 years later and I studied the arts. So I studied English and history and some psychology, and obtained a degree. And sort of all through that time period, I was very involved in the tabletop gaming scene in Dublin. I was very involved in running things like conventions. I also worked in a video game store for years, so I was kind of playing a lot of games, if you like, for free, getting to just get my hands on sort of everything without actually having to sort of spend money on it and stuff like that. And so my education was a bit, from a games perspective, was kind of a bit of a mixed bag, really. I mean, looking back on it, it wasn't like intended to be that way, but I ended up sort of touching on a whole lot of different areas all through my 20s. And as a designer today, I use influences from all across the board on those kinds of things to make games. So after I graduated from university finally, I went to work for a web design agency for about a year, which made a lot of they developed a lot of computer-based training software. So you'd have a lot of like writing scripts for and designing interactions for this kind of very limited kind of environment. And then from there, I got a job working for Havoc, the middleware company, as a sort of a technical writer. And so I worked on I wrote a lot of their manuals and all that kind of stuff. In retrospect, I was quite bad at it, but it was a lot of my introduction, if you like, to the formal side of the industry came from working at Havoc and just kind of learning all about like what was GDC, for instance, and all this kind of stuff. I then moved to London, and with the intent of, I wasn't quite sure, like maybe being a journalist, maybe being a writer, something. And I think a friend encouraged me to apply to a couple of video game companies there, because he said, like, well, you've got all this experience, like maybe you'd actually be able to be like a designer, and that's basically your dream job. And I said, yes, it is, but I didn't really believe him, but I decided I'd sort of try anyway. And he was right. I got a interview via a recruiter called Aardvark Swift for a company called Asylum Entertainment, and within about a week was suddenly hired as a games designer, working on a licensed PS2 platform game called Galador. And that was my start. Like, I got in and I was there for about a year. and then moved on to, I worked at Lionhead for a few years after that. I worked at a company called Climax for about a year, I think, after that, and then sort of just moved kind of on and up through, you know, the chain, so to speak. So recently I worked a lot doing developer relations for Ouya, where I was working with a lot of indie developers and trying to, if you like, help make their games work for the platform, solve a lot of their issues, give design feedback, all that kind of stuff. I worked with the guys who are making the game That Dragon Cancer, for instance, which is super interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it kind of come out, and I think everybody should, if they get a chance, should play it. Prior to that, I've worked for quite a lot of startup kind of companies in the last few years. I've been a consultant type of guy for a while, and so a lot of my work would be a little bit under NDA, so I can't like talk about it, unfortunately, but just lots of different things. I've worked in like mobile games, tablet games, Facebook stuff, some more kind of normal video game stuff as well, and that kind of thing. My personal work, though, I guess, my writing has become a lot of my sort of personal work, so through my site and through my the book that I'm writing, that's the kind of stuff that I find is very much drawing my enthusiasm at the moment. And so I'm very excited to get my book finished this year, hopefully get it out published, have everybody read it and say, yay, wow, that's really cool, or I totally hate that. But at least, you know, it's kind of, it feels like a good contribution. So I think it's a really interesting time in games at the moment. I mean, it's always an interesting time in games, but especially so because a lot of the technical surge that's happened over the last 5 years, different platforms, different paradigms of play, feels like that's kind of settled down to a large extent. We know what a mobile game is now, we know what a tablet game is now, we know what a Steam game is, and we know what a console game is, and all of those kinds of different chunks, if you like, sort of are becoming quite steady. There's some excitement that people have for things like virtual reality sets, but to me it feels like it's maybe a little young to sort of really know what that's going to be just yet. But it's more the culture of games, the art of games, the expansion of the player types on the one hand, the expansion of the kinds of themes of games, particularly in the indie space, like what's going on with all of their the experimentation in that space. That for me that's kind of where the future is to be found.
My name is Gerald Mactor. One of my earliest game memories would be Super Spike Volleyball on NES. That was like the first game my parents bought for me, so I had to get good grades and everything to get that, and I ended up using the buff guys. They were awesome with the spikes, so that's my earliest memory. You know, like my friends were in the industry. They worked at a company called Namco, and you know, like I was always dying to go in there. They worked in the test department, so it was like, you know, it was glorious. You know, like they were just saying, you know, we get to play games all day. We take a lunch, we get pizza, and come back and we play more games. So I begged them and begged them. After about 2 years, there was finally an opening, and I got in there, and it was everything they said. It was super fun. It was a lot of tough work to be in the test department, but it was, you know, it was my first step in there. I was a green tester, so it was super fun. Had an awesome crew, and we had fun knocking it out. I think the best thing about working in video games probably be being able to change on the fly. I mean, at this job right here, if we have an idea or something that we want to get out there to the public, it's pretty instantaneous. We can have a meeting in one day, we can get it implemented, to test pretty much the next day, and then pretty much after that, it'll get into the eyes of the public, which is awesome to see. It's like getting feedback right away. So for any creative mind that wants to really get input back from the people, it's pretty instantaneous, and that feels good. I used to work console, and pretty much it was one shot, one go, and then you would just read the reviews after, and if it was a good job, you could see good reviews, but if it was a bad job, you would see some negative reviews, and there's nothing really you could do about it. But being in the mobile and being able to change things on the fly allows you to compensate for things, or even ride the wave of something that's doing really good, and really being more in tune with your customers and your players, which is a really nice thing to do. I think gaming is, people are being more and more comfortable. Like what I've seen is people are more and more comfortable playing on their mobile device. Like when it first came out, it was pretty much a novelty thing. It still wasn't considered like an actual platform. It was just something to do for fun, quick hits. And a lot of games still are kind of like that. But I think in the future, a lot of people become more dependent on their phone. As your phone does more, people are using their phones for cameras, for helping them find each other, meeting people, and not just your phone call. Before it was just like, hey, I'm just using my phone to make a phone call. But now it's pretty much crucial to a lot of things that people do in their lives. And I think gaming is going to become a big part of that because you're staring at it all day, you're talking on it, you're using it for apps. Why not have some fun on it? And I think you can see in the past several years it's just growing and growing. So as more people get more savvy with their phones, and you can see a bigger range of people using it. You can see younger people, you can see older people using it. It's just a crucial part of everyday life. So I just think it's going to get bigger and bigger. I think what I would love to see is I'd love to play my console or play my PC and just leave the room if I have to leave, and then just continue off on my phone and do whatever I need to do on there, and still do my gaming things that I need to do on there, chat with my friends, get the whole clan vibe going together that works with your mobile thing. So I want to see that.
My name's Jared Neuenhaus. I work at Her Interactive, the developer and publisher of Nancy Drew Games, and I'm the director of marketing. Well, I was a gamer pretty much very early on, but a gamer of a different sort. I was very much into sports and played soccer, both collegiately and professionally. But I also just loved games growing up. I mean, I was the first kid on the block to, play Galaga and, have an Atari and all that good stuff. And we just had, 24-hour tournaments and all the rest of it. So I was always into games from pretty much a pretty young age. No, both my BA and my MA is not completely unrelated, but it's in communications, mass communications and political science. But it was something really that I just gravitated towards after graduating, and I always wanted to be in the entertainment space, particularly not necessarily games, but when it came to mobile entertainment, online entertainment, and then that just gradually morphed into games. My first job, well, I was working for a company that, again, was kind of in the mobile entertainment space. And one day, and I believe this was back in 2005, we have to start developing games for mobile. The first one that I worked on was taking a lot of TV properties over to mobile. One of those first ones was Deal or No Deal, and taking that to mobile. And then we did New York Times Crossword, and then we did one of our best ever games that we did, was highly successful, was Family Feud. Now that seems like an older property or older brand that wouldn't really have a lot of cachet with today's players, but it was very, very successful. Yeah, again, from those titles to a lot of Nancy Drew games, which I currently do right now, to Hardy Boys, to some games that I launched when I was with Sandlot Games called Cake Mania, some older titles such as Galactic Skater, Snail Mail, so again, on multiple different platforms. Well, I think the biggest difference is just the proliferation of platforms. And how quickly the industry moves as well. When I first started and working for a pure play game company, it was all about console and then about PCs. And then we've gone to social and everybody wanted to be on social. And then we went to mobile and everyone wanted to be mobile. And now, not only that, but now we want to focus on casino as a way to generate revenue very quickly, looking at the success of other apps that are in that space. But I think the biggest lesson is how quickly and how much you need to be ahead of that curve and not behind it. Because if you look at social, for example, what happened on Facebook, it was a great platform for a very short time, and then it went away. So it's really a good lesson for people that are either in the industry or who want to get into industry, that you really need to stay on top of those trends. Well, probably rather generic advice, but I would learn as much as you possibly can. Learn as much as you can about all the different platforms. And then also learn about the kind of games that you like and enjoy and play yourself. and then target those companies that you want to work for that develop those types of games. I think a hard thing to do is work for a company that is developing games that you don't really enjoy or don't believe in. I personally believe that you need to. So really taking the time to understand it, to play them, to be able to talk about it, I think is really important. Yes, but I think it's continually changing. So I do think there is a place for free-to-play. But what that looks like a year or 2 years from now, I think will probably look different than what it does right now. I think a lot of us are still learning about, the core metrics that we're tracking and where to put those, those value adds, or where to offer those power-ups, and when you might want to purchase something and when you might not want to. So I think as an industry, we're currently learning and growing and getting much better at it. So I do think it's going to look different in 1 to 2 years, but I do think it'll be here. It's a very good question, and it is challenging because the players these days, do expect a free version, or they do look for that free version first. I think we've been able to, buck that trend a little bit because, well, we have a fantastic brand, a brand that's recognizable even 85 years after we've launched it. So that certainly helps us, but not every game developer has that advantage. But the second part is making a real high-quality game. And a game that is near flawless and seamless, and it's a lot of fun. They're going to want to talk about it, play it, share with their friends. That is really what it's going to take. So I think there's even more pressure on developers that create premium games than there is on free-to-play, because you really only get that one shot. And if they don't enjoy it, they're never going to come back, and they're never going to come back and purchase another game. So in 2015, and keep in mind I left my crystal ball at home, however, I think we'll be talking about a lot about the same issues. I think it will be about free-to-play. I think we'll be talking about casinos still. I think we'll be talking about how some of those traditional developers on console, PC, Mac are still performing in the game industry. I think certainly Microsoft with Xbox, there's going to be a lot of new features and new consoles there as well. So I think a lot of people are looking forward to that. I think we'll be talking a lot about mobile still. Certainly that's not going away. So I think a lot of those same issues will still be there in 2015.
People are going to walk by and watch me talking to an empty chair. It's going to be like freaky.
What's going on with him?
Back in 1996, so I'm an old timer in the business.
What the hell was that voice?
My old man voice.
Terrible. It was like a monster voice. So how long have you worked in the games industry?
I've been there since 1996. Is that a better old man voice? Or is that like a prospector voice?
Kind of ingesting some drugs or substances that'll alter our brains to play games? Maybe.
But then he just says maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe.